I would like to remind you that our official sponsors are Morale, Publishing House, Adobe, OPEX. You will find in each one of your brochures the handouts this publishing house is giving you, and it's the possibility of downloading any book of O'Reilly Publishing House. After the event, everyone will be able to download it, even the Polar Bear book, to create Wi-Fi's. They are our official sponsor. You will find discounts in the buy. They send kits through DHL. We have the whole package included. At the end, I hope you to wait for the end, because at the end we will have some raffles of other prizes our sponsors gave. Not being anything, I hope the center of activities is within you. I know that here we have experts that maybe were not able to be here today, but I hope the queries you have, everyone start applying architecture of information, so in a year you can show us your experiences. I welcome Mr. Hernando Cruz. Thank you. Before anything, thank you. Good morning. This is challenging, seeing people so young with a concept that, if I'm honest, does not have a definition. Because if you heard Morville associates it to multiple run, a multiple challenge run. The concept, when it came up, it was raised as part of the process, which doesn't have anything to do with internet. I work in an organization where I do research, and I'm a scholar. I'm an invisible architect, because where I really work is with the Siemens Corporation, through the internet, how the 23rd century people are going to be working. Interfaces don't have anything to do with processes or a portal or web pages. They have to do with the interface of refrigerator that Electrolux is designing, so somebody can program it, set it from his car or from his telephone. To find out what he's lacking and what he has to buy. In avionics, there are several interfaces, or in numeric control machines. We are developing different conceptions of machines. So my first request is that there is a game between the practical and theoretical game, and you got into this race, and you are not going to be able to do it alone. Many people think that in graphic design, that is architecture, or usability, or economics. That's architecture, and that is not. So this definition will be linked to the concept we're looking for, which is nothing finished, completely finished. Even though it's something not finished, what I'm doing, is it part of this process? We would have to understand that, yes, in a process of operative structures where a user should be able to work in a virtual or physical context, that's not architecture, only it's part of a potential definition. Another element we have been having people who have learned, many people just start creating. They don't believe anything in theoretics. If sometimes, if you find Laudo de Sec, you will find this author which talks about an architecture where we have to combine psychology, mathematics, art, graphic design. That focus lives, but you have realized too that a web page without a headline associated to a certain language which is artificial, like XML or XT, HTML, and basically these are metadata, which is a combination of managing the fields of a classic database plus the describers of management of documents. So the organization and information systems cross-line are part of a concept of an architecture, but they don't define it either. The other question, many of us are linked to seeing the aesthetic part in a portal, in an interface, and understanding the interface as the architecture. Customization also is part of architecture, or being able to personalize. And it might be art, and it could be wonderful and very coherent with a usability process, or an ergonomics process, or transparency to be able to consult information, but that, even though it's part of the definition of architecture, but that is still not information architecture. And if we go further on, there are certain types of front pages of interfaces which have concentrated in the possibility of recovery and the speed of usage, having lots of recourses. When you talk about FAQ, we talk about ergonomics, but when you start distributing the frames, or if there is a process of a meta searcher, and that talks about a hybridization, which is part of the definition of architecture, but it's not. What am I trying to do? I'm telling you what the limits of the definition, of the possible definition are, and just trying to establish that there are certain elements which are not part and which are part of a potential definition of architecture. It can be painful that even though it's part of a design process, even though we have always wanted for the interface and the design to be architecture, but it's only an aspect of architecture. And I am creating tools of organizing knowledge, a meta searcher, which uses terms, a dictionary, some metadata, some describers, but that is not architecture fully. There is a third group which is developing something. The web has developed from storage to becoming a transfer of information, a process of socialization of information, particularly the French informational architectures or document makers or developers of this medium have realized topics about the social web. You find certain systems focused on the design of architecture in the fidelization, the CRMs, the management of customers, but you also have the knowledge or management of knowledge, or processes to manage messaging. In this small slide, you will find that there is the worry regarding the connection of the social 2.0 web and what we do to manage social media, the tools for messaging and commercialization, the connectivity concept of Web 2.0 are part of the definition, but it doesn't define information architecture. Where could we then find an approximation or a potential definition? Everything that you focus is mostly projects. Those projects you should have faced before issues regarding the needs of the users. And one of the parts, the difficult parts, are the analysis of the users' needs, the opportunities this generates. Many times people created web pages without user analysis, without a market analysis. You still find it. There was a person doing everything. We didn't have a social technical group, and we never found opportunities in those cases. After having created the web page, we just didn't position it. There are even trends where people follow trends, what's happening in the designs, in the market, and that's what I try to do to develop. Since they are projects, you have probably had something regarding budgets and times. Sometimes playing to thinking that I have everything in budget and no time. This support, this balance. So where could we have a definition in the practical way? The first element that could help us look for a definition is what is that we want to transmit, to convey? What is the contents of this space? The vision of Morville in showing that the central auditorium of the Congress Library, the whole idea was creating spaces in what the urban architect does, where the space would motivate. Donald Norman has recovered that emotional concept of participation in the ludics, in concentration, and generating any kind of retro feedback, like in a city, the architecture to arrange things in the concept. So that flows, and this content is an emotional concept of the architecture. Information, documents, anything, whatever you want, but that is what you're going to render to your customer.
La otra es que vamos a tener limitaciones en términos de procesamiento.
We will have definitions and limitings. How can we structure or categorize? How can we categorize or try to link the user with this content? This would be the second element. There are many fabulous ideas that in a technological time there were no problem in doing it. There wasn't even the codes or the language or the way of metadating. That would be an element, a potential element in the definition. And the last one, which is a fundamental one, given the architect of the information. And that has to do with the human talent, with creativity. Many people just try to use a perfect technique of diagramming and usage of languages, but then you have to hire the creative person, so that makes sense. Or you have to, vice versa, support a creative person so you can support him so he doesn't feel limited. That information architecture is what we're developing, and that might be the most important factor in the looking for that definition. Chronology, unfortunately, was small too, but let me tell you, the definition has passed in three big stages. The first one, the term was discovered in Palo Alto. The Xerox researchers creating the interface of photocopiers. When the people from Xerox asked the group of the Palo Alto people in California, asked them for an interface for people to learn fast. Secondly, a transactional automatic process. And third, with icons, we don't want words, we want icons. In an interface time where there were no windows, in Unix, we would have to give 3 to 4 codes to be able to print the document. They started thinking of a graphic interface. Well, then you know all the history. People who made Windows and who got rich in that. But when you get through Palo Alto, and then later on, the consolidated thesis and dissertations would find it in a professional development. Who by Mr. Weissman? I'm naming people who maybe you don't know, because this happened through psychologists, goes through developers of languages. And this structure of consolidation put between 1983 and 1996 converges into the gurus that we know. Now, when you see Morville, you're seeing the last phase on the spreading out of the concept. Morville, Rockford, Soul, they're the ones who evoke the pragmatic parts of production. But on the other hand, we have other kinds of scientific research which show the psychophysics development like Weber, or the development of structures of knowledge like Donald does. Three perspectives we would have to suggest a definition. One first perspective, a conjunto, a complex definition, an anthropological vision where somebody who has a cultural asset, for example, in a web page of tourism of France, what's mostly important is its architecture, its music expressions, its dancing and music expressions. Those cultural assets are anthropology, and they should be part of the definition. But also the psychophysics. When you see the avionics, the interface for a pilot, you realize that the variations of intensity, of sound, of light, the changes in the interface have to do with physics and psychology, which comes from Weber. And when we talk about the contents, even though it might be audio or video, finally the analysis corresponds to sociological and psychological currents. So we have those others who are not developers, designers, not so pragmatic or scientific. But there will also be an artistic component. When you see a web page, you will find styles. Some designer or architect has a certain style, diagramming, aesthetic, colors which express some kind of presence. But then we get into the serious part, the production and definition part of it. We would not take too long in an interface if I don't guarantee the cost and the return of the investment. Everything you do has a value, and that information, we won't leave it. This network would be marvelous, because many of the cases you will find many enterprises would not let them be shared because it's part of the asset of a business. In terms of production, this creates new opportunities, and it is supposed that architecture helps you develop it. We talk about ergonomics, but we also use usability, which is an indicator of ergonomics. The standard was first, but now we have a usability engineering. And I repeat, the vision of an interface, and thinking that architecture only shows it through the interface. That's a vision which is technical, artistic. What is the real vision we find in huge companies like Donald Norman and Nelson made? It's a confirmation made by the social-technical focus, combining the conductual with the technical artistic, and with the semiotics, the computational semiotics. Anybody who knows it has to do with languages. So when you face HTML5.0 or OW within the semantic network, either content, you will realize you have been working pragmatics, metadata, relationships, and that is semiotics, with syntaxes, taxonomy, grammar. Morville was one of the first ones which tried to put the ethnic base in that triangle. In the basis was the cultural concepts, realizing why some web pages were not successful. Maybe because they were not adapted to the user. So if we wanted to make progress in the definition, we would have to take into account those three perspectives. And we would have to manage the people who manage those perspectives. I tried to resume. Donald Norman, even though you might think, is not an anthropologist, but when he got to the group of Apple, he took them out from being specialists in a multidisciplinary rule into a transdisciplinary rule. If you see the BlackBerry, you realize that the work of Donald Norman had a result. And if you realize the operative system, you realize the incredible potential this physical interface has. If you realize the psychophysics, you understand with Better's Letterman, he's a specialist in visualization. I hope you get into Sportfire, a software which makes something marvelous. It doesn't matter what kind of problem you have, you can make it into an analysis of psychology or statistics, or to make an analysis of cybernetics. The software challenges you to do something with it. If we went to the sociological focus, we would have to take trees into account, because he's visualizing the management of knowledge in the web, not only developing it in a tacit way, not only by humans, but by machines. It's a concept which is just being researched now. And within the technical artistic field, to find a definition, you should go into Peter Merkholz, which associates aesthetics with semiotics and induces the question of philosophy. Are languages also art? And if you read a Borges essay, he realizes, yes. So there are specialists in sophisticated languages, which end up being not programming, but art. And that question is there. If you want production, I wrote down Michael Edward Fox. You can find Edward Fox from Berlin in 2000. Fox, in a conference, showed that we should change the units in libraries, how the digital concept would carry on with documents, and how that culture had to change from hard copy to a virtual concept, as well as Ganassi, who realized we need more tools for the architect to better the design, to improve the design. In engineering and design, we have to talk about Jacob Nielsen, and if you find him, he has 17 patents in metrics, how to measure, how to analyze, how to know the trends of a market, or the evolution of an informational web, as well as Jennifer Priest in technologies of interface oriented toward processes. Socio-technically speaking, we should recommend, for a consistent definition, Norman and Morville again,
a los que trabajan
And the people who work in it, in human-machine interfaces, the French and HCI American current, conductually, anybody defining from the RSS or any machine, or supporters of Twitters and Facebook, that would be the social technical area. In the artistic area, we would look for the content that Yershow defines. This would be the graphics. I would like to find out what others are looking for. When you analyze it, this graph is a proposal of what informational architecture is by a private, non-scientific organization. When you start looking for the definition, you realize the central area is the concept. Around, you find the structural elements, as they call them, which will show you the usability, how it is structural for them, or design is structural for them. And it has two other elements with which we are playing. Up, we have the user with the analysis on his behalf, and down, we have the hybridization knowledge transfer. So if you look on how others define for another industrial context what informational architecture is, you realize that you talk about contours. They make the flows of information explicit, of data. They make the hybridization of knowledge and information. There is an ascending knowledge because it's focused on the user and fed back on the user, and they think there is not only one focus of architecture but many. So what you realize is that this thing is being defined through sets of processes. One of the first organizations which realized about the definition of architecture was the Microsoft organization. In 2002 and 2003, Vivian Priest presented how they visualized the portal of knowledge. What is green there is a stratus, and she gave importance to the metadata and to the way of organizing knowledge. But if you analyze it, it evidences that in this model of knowledge, it includes structures, involves relationships with other processes. What is in purple is all the digitalization, the convergence and integration of digitality. It also establishes some conditions of ergonomics, up the customization and personalization, but it also have transversal cross-over elements. The security is part of the structure of architecture. Thinking of a metrics as part of the architecture too. And again, you deduce that the definition has to do with processes, that architecture has to do with sets of processes. Evermore. The evolution of web shows it. Regularly, this is a diagram presented by Nova Spiva, a researcher and developer of software, graphic designs from Harvard to the Ohio University, from Boeing to Cisco Corporation. And he defined the evolution of web in 4 quadrants. First, communicating information. Secondly, communicating people, communicating machines. And 4, making that machines and people generate industries of intelligence. Those are the four quadrants. You will see them in detail later on in the presentation. But finally, that's the biggest challenge for the informational architects. It's not in the Web 2.0, but in the Web 3.0 with the ontology, the schematic languages. That's where the challenge is going to be. Nevertheless, you find elements where you have to overcome the syndrome of storing databases and web pages, which we have to conserve an ascendant towards the user, as well as what Morville said. As an architect, you have to focus on social issues. The influx is more on the machines, more than in the humans. You have to remember that the semiotic topic won't be only languages, but ontologic structures. And you have to conserve the humility, saying that I can't do it alone. If there is a team, the biggest team is building a team, potentiating it, and making it into a transdisciplinary team. That is a challenge, and hopefully formation. This afternoon, you will hear Roswell. When you hear him, I hope some of these elements I'm going to talk about, he will name them. And during the day, you will find presentations where if anybody would ask for principles of architecture, I like these. First, the context and the optimization of surfing. Within the definition, it should be. Secondly, a transparent design, making it invisible for the user. All the difficulties we're having, the more transparent, the more optimal. Third, the measuring and establishing the cost of these relationships, and that somebody should help me find the benefits or the measuring. That's fundamental. The establishment of a style which will make me competitive and which allows me to overcome competition. Architects are the ones who are destroying other web pages by just competing against them. Making the interface in very short times. When Vivian Bliss was presenting her project, she had transformation web pages in 2 years. Imagine that Google or Amazon had the same structure for 2 years. No way, and much less for the marketing of web pages. The flexibility, access, different types of connectivity, that's valid. Equilibrating, balancing the investment in ergonomics and ergonomics. The trend is thinking in long-term products, but with a possibility of including inverse engineering all the time. And the other one is not forgetting that this is a project trying to solve needs, new innovative methods and products which were not present before, because you have to take advantage of opportunities. Architecture has to do that. What do you find in an enterprise like Nielsen and Norman's? You find excellent practices. If you observe those practices, those will enrich your models of architecture and your processes, adding value. That comes from the theory of process management, and that allowed me to make a definition which is not the classical. The definition I'm leaving you there for you to see it is that architecture, from the process, it became a macro main process, a sequence of activities which are coordinated, but at the same time independent, with an evaluation of costs. So you have to have a diagrammer, a psychologist, market analyst, and this macro process is supported for people who have read, are supported in architectural processes and strategic processes. An architect has to have a great relationship with a software developer or with the developer of images. It depends on him, or with the same graphic designer. But also, he would have the best relationship possible with the analyst of markets, as well as in terms of processes, analysis of trends and consumption, of development, of competition. That would be the approximation to the definition, but because it would be temporary to say that there is a definition, and Morville set it forth. I thank you for your attention. I thank you. You enjoy this day of presentations. Okay, thank you, Engineer Cruz. We would like to have some questions, session of questions. We will have a microphone for the public to ask questions. Please raise your hand. Any question you want to make to the presenter? Please, not everyone at the same time. The whole idea is that we don't have any questions, even though I might know much. Good morning. My specific question goes, we do not mention and relate aspects regarding the information specifically in education. Everything having to do with the pedagogical design and the structure of contents for education, where we involve aspects, additional aspects. Where can we put them in the contents? The styles of learning, the pedagogical structures specific for the different environments and disciplines. Well, since this was a definition from the conductual focus, yes, we could involve it. If we talk about the Blackboard group or a free product like Mufflet, you will realize that people who transform these products, they pass through a phase of design where the project was initially a storage room, and then they had to appropriate theories, constructivist theories, associated with processes regarding education. But you also find cognitive psychology. So the icons of the first version and the last version, you realize why they were transformed. The explanation, you find it in conductual psychology, not only in theory, but also in practical theories. You realize why the wind, why the connection, why the chat, why the talk with a chat or a blog, it doesn't have a sense from the point of view of design, but from the point of view of education. The designers of a conductual application comes, you will see an evolution of the UC portal of the California University, and you see the transformation of the portal. You realize the question. They only had designers which reflect the definition like Oracle or imports, but you realize now a class structure of exchange followed but by some didactical set forths in the building of the conference, or whatever the educator needs, or so he can adapt to be coherent with education. I didn't name it directly in an explicit way, but definitely these products are one of the branches of application, the most important ones. Good morning, doctor. I would like to make a short question. You're talking about your definition about the relationship between microprocesses, team ones, with the management of processes. My question has to do with from the point of view of the management processes, because you include the strategic and the support ones, but I imagine that they have a relationship, a close relationship, in the PH, BA, circle, and all the rest. Is it contemplated within your definition? Yes, when you see the origin or of this comes from port and down a port, and you realize it goes there, that it is connected with the high management processes, and that it goes because the courses that Norman and Nelson's give not only manage the effects of a design and the possibility of a user to capture the information, but also the possibility of having managed the information. Two more questions. Good morning. Which would be your counsel for a good architect? We're having this question within the university. We never thought of making architects of information. They self-educated themselves. They said something about a portal. That's a challenge for Colombia. We're passing from $2,000 million of exporting to 550 million. The information technology is the biggest producer of information and money. That is our challenge, forming people which combine all these elements. So you can combine all the knowledge on the graphic. Maybe you have challenges, or maybe I could learn math, and through analysis methods I could support. Or how can I become a great creative person? How can I generate content and learn? Some people have the talent. I will have to educate it. So you need three elements: human talent, challenging yourself. The second one is learning the techniques. If you don't know 3 or 4 languages and are exploring into it, manage 5 or 6 design softwares, how you understand a graphic and a voice or biophysic graphic interface, you would have problems. And the last element is that you are capable not only of knowing the tools, but also realizing that there are different foci on approximation to the concept, from a conductual process, from a technical or artistic process, and maybe realizing that other people might know more about architecture, but sometimes you learn more in the group work than everything that you learned in a university. This is the last question. Good morning. This is a question going to the basics. You were talking about how to focus the analysis of the user. We have had the socio-economical focus, or the intervals of data, and when we talk about the needs of the user, how could we focus the studies for the user? Because this is where the opportunities come that might be most interesting for him. There is something fundamental, which is not thinking of the user as a black box, a receptor only, or somebody we have parametrized. Some indicators tell us it's this profile, and we have to manage this. We have to think. We have found that when you talk about a creative user, a dynamic user, somebody who has a possibility of becoming from receptor to producer, which happens in the great architectures, you find why did Facebook have a sense, make sense, because social networks are not networks where they come from documentation networks, but when these kids decide that the user is intelligent, he can transform, he can change profile and stop being a receptor to start generating contents and communicate in their own way, the success is guaranteed. You look at the user and look the concept of blogs, and it's derived from the concept of that memory that somebody would leave about a route or a trip. But if you see a blog now, it has a component of intelligence and selective participation. Anybody who has a blog just puts what's important for him about something, about a phenomena, an article, whatever, his own opinion, thinking on this user not as a box or as a receptor, but somebody intelligent, creative, capable of coming out of the context of just receiving or consuming. That is happening in the new studies. You will hear some presentation today which will show you analysis of users in this foci, this focus. I would ask you for any additional questions. We'll have all day to ask questions, so thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hernando Cruz, for your participation.